Parliament's Programming Committee of the National Assembly has granted the Section 25 Ad Hoc Committee an extension until the 10th of September to finalise its work. The committee was expected to conclude its work by yesterday. The purpose of the process is to amend Section 25 of the Constitution to allow for land reform that will lead to expropriation without compensation. Political parties in Parliament differ on how to address the historic dispossession of land that has left the majority of South Africans landless. And while some parties hope that the amendment of Section 25 of the Constitution will pass legal muster and will ensure equitable access to land and provide for ownership and food security, others are opposed to the expropriation without compensation. Section 25 Ad Hoc Committee Chairperson Dr. Motshekga joins us now virtually to have a discussion about the latest development. Dr. Motshekga, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you, and good morning to the listeners.
So the committee was expected to finalise its work by yesterday. So can you just please explain to us what caused the delays that hindered the committee from finishing its business on the expected time?
I wouldn't even call it a delay. You will realise that we are amending a section of the Constitution which is part of the Bill of Rights. And the Constitution is not like an ordinary law. It must reflect the will of the people of South Africa as a whole. And even the standards required for passing that bill is higher than the standard required in respect of ordinary legislation. So we have to work carefully, make sure that we take everybody on board, we take the public on board, and we are enjoined by the Constitution to ensure that there is adequate public participation. So we are grateful to the new Speaker, Honorable Mapisa Ngakula, that she understood that obligation on us, and she granted us the extension.
So the purpose of the bill that you are currently working on is to amend Section 25 of the Constitution so as to allow for land to be expropriated without compensation for the purposes of land reform. So in terms of how this will actually practically work, can you just explain to us as the public, if it were to pass in that form, how exactly it will unfold?
The idea is that for the past 25 years, government struggled to make the land accessible to the majority of the people who were historically dispossessed of the land. You will know that by 1910, even before the formation of the Union of South Africa, black people were not allowed to buy or lease land. And in fact, they have been headed into native reserves, or what were called native locations, as early as 1886. So they had become sharecroppers, they become labor tenants, they become homeless, landless. So that was already a crisis before 1913. Now, the current Constitution says you can't claim land which was taken away before June 1913. But by June 1913, the land was gone already. Black people were labor tenants, they were squatters, they were homeless in the country of their birth. Now, which means that the willing buyer, willing seller also had failed, and the restitution program has failed because the African people virtually had to buy back 87% of the country. And where do you get the resources to buy back? So we need now to amend the Constitution, provide for expropriation without compensation, and the circumstances under which that will be done will be provided for in national legislation. So it shouldn't be a complicated process, and that's why we say as well, we cannot leave that matter into the hands of the courts. The courts should only come in where there is a dispute, but otherwise it is an executive function to implement expropriation of land without compensation.
I'm still missing the practical nature of it. So give us an example of a piece of land. We can use the SABC's Auckland Park premises. If that were to be expropriated without compensation, exactly how will that process unfold from start to finish?
I think you are giving a wrong example because urban land is very difficult. If now I go and claim the whole of Johannesburg, how is that feasible?
But
that's why,
Dr. Motshekga, I don't want to complicate it. It was simply an example. You can use any piece of land anywhere in the Republic of South Africa. Just explain to us practically how it will work. Let's say we've identified a piece of land in, Dalstroom in Mpumalanga, and this piece of land has been identified for land reform purposes. How is that going to unfold practically if it is a situation of expropriation without compensation?
The law, we have Land Restitution Act. It provides for a process that must be followed. And that act gives expression to the Constitution. So there's an enabling law that provides for the process. But now, for instance, if you take Dalstroom, that area in Mpumalanga, Pixley Isaka Gaseme bought farms there, and those farms were taken away and then given to white farmers. And you take Makhuba's Kloof in Limpopo, all the farms in Makhuba's Kloof, the richest tree plants, were taken away, and the king was killed around 1894. Now, the law provides for the process of claiming, but the only difference is that we're saying now you don't have to pay for that land. You take it without compensation. You take a Livubu area in Limpopo again. The people were dispossessed of the land, and then because they were defeated in the war, the Transvaal Republic said the whole land is war booty, and therefore the people will never get it. So there are so many examples throughout the country, because as we speak now, Africans live in communal areas, which are the old native reserves, and then Africans live in the townships, in the informal settlements, so they are actually in exile in their own country. And that's a situation which is a time bomb for the future in this country. So the proposed amendments will ensure that land is equitably available to all the people of South Africa. All people must be involved in productive work, but land is not only used for agriculture. There are sacred spaces that must be prepared. For instance, in the Free State, you have the Cape of Mantsopa, and then you find the Anglican Church has built a tourist center on top of a religious center. And that is an example of why, for instance, in Palestine, you have conflict, because people are fighting over sacred sites. When you go to Vembe district in Limpopo, there's a sacred place at Pidi Falls where people worship the African goddess Nwali, but now somebody comes and develops a tourism facility there. So I think that the proposed amendment will prevent a conflict that I say is a time bomb, and we can't always be fighting. We need to find a solution to these problems immediately, and this amendment is the surest means of getting to that.
I'm not 100% clear yet, but let me move on to the next part, which you talk about equitable access. How does the bill make provision for equitable access for all South Africans to the land of this country?
Equitable access in the sense that by 1913, African people were only allocated 7% of the total surface of South Africa. And because of illnesses, overcrowding, that was increased to 13% in 1936. So the rest of the 87% of the country remained in the hands of the white communities. Now we are saying that is unjust, is criminal. So we have to undo that and make sure that indigenous African people and all black people have access to the land, that 87%. In that 87%, part of it is owned by companies, monopolies, part of it is owned by the white farmers and the absentee landlords who are in America, in England, in Europe. They are not even using the land. Part of the land is game farms, and part of the land is in the hands of the state. So we have to unravel that whole thing and make sure that ordinary people have access to the land. You can see the problems that we have now. For instance, our people cannot observe the health protocols because these townships are so overcrowded, the informal settlements are so overcrowded. When you say to the people, keep a safe distance, what safe distance do you keep when 13 people live in one room or two rooms? It's not possible. This situation is just untenable, it's unacceptable. So all peace-loving people, black or white, will have to support this amendment. Otherwise, they will be planting more time bombs in our country.
I do remember under former Minister Kukile Mkwinti that there was a land audit conducted. So speaking of the land that is in the state's possession, how much of that, how has this process worked in ensuring equitable access for the people of this country to the land currently in the state's possession?
See, the state has already begun releasing land. But, the state has land in its custody for public purposes, public interest. But the great part of the land is the land that was forcibly taken away from people. And these people lodged claims in 1998 for restitution. And those claims are not moving because you have to pay in order to get back your land. So for me, the important thing is that the people that have claimed the land must get their land back, because in the meantime, if you don't return the land to them, the people who are occupying the land are making huge developments. In 10 years' time, it's not going to be possible to restitute the land, which means the people will have lost the land forever. So this process must be speeded up, and Minister Kukile Mkwinti did a good job. He did an audit, and Public Works under Honorable Dilile did a good work. They have a public audit, so we know which land is where, and we are in a position to pass a legislation which spells out the circumstances under which land should be expropriated, so that there is no obstacle. The only obstacle would be people who want to politicize this matter and forget that this is about the future of the country, the stability of the country, and the survival of everybody, because this poverty and unemployment that we're talking about, this moral degeneration that is facing us, all these things are the consequences of landlessness and homelessness poverty and unemployment. So there's no government that can address these social ills without making the land available to the people.
Well, we have to leave it there, unfortunately, but no doubt we'll still have much to deliberate upon regarding this particular matter. But thanks so much for your time. Section 25 Ad Hoc Committee Chairperson Dr. Motshekga updating us on the Section 25 land reform parliamentary process. They've been granted a 2-week extension until the 10th of September to finalise the work of the committee.